Okay, recording's up.
Okay, so welcome. We have 7 people for the moment. Hope it grows a little bit. Um, just to remind any newbies, if you want a copy of the documentation in the book, you can scan this QR or use this link, which is at the bottom of every page in the book. And then I'm using these as my slides, so you have all documentation. Videos are being made and will be announced. So fine. And then here is our book outline, and we are here, chapter 7, risk management. And Tuesday and Thursday next week, we'll do the problem of alignment with the enterprise, and then the problem of the organization and responsibility. So, that's enough. Now I'm going to go to number 7. There we go. That was 9, 8. There we go. Okay, so all about risk, and hide this. Let's see. Get to the beginning would be a nice idea. There we go. Okay. So first, maybe definition of risk. I know everybody knows the word, risiko på norsk, and but maybe people have different definitions. They certainly do. There is at least an international standards organization risk standard. You can't argue too much with that. The effect of uncertainty on objectives. And I like that a lot. It fits my needs because I'm, as you know, this is value architecture, that is architecture to deliver value to stakeholders. And we express the stakeholder value in objectives. So risk means the fact that we're not absolutely sure we can reach the numeric objectives for the values and qualities on time, okay, or maybe at cost and things like that. So just any kind of uncertainty related to the reaching the objectives. Here's another one I found in this commission, and it also is something I don't see often expressed very well, a little bit here and there, but it's this base. I'll read it out. Every entity, that means every organization or part of the organization, and this is for enterprise risk management, so it's about enterprise, exists to provide value for stakeholders, my exact terms too. So I like this a lot. So it's got all the right keywords. So there are some people who agree with me, and there are some people who sort of agree. They say nice words like this, but then they don't go and quantify the value. They do not explore all the stakeholders. They have no system of evaluating the architecture directly with regard to how well it might satisfy the value. You know, for example, security architecture, how well it satisfies the security level. And so they don't really do it in practice. We pretend here to give you the practical tools to explore stakeholders better, to identify values more clearly and better, to quantify the values so they are numerically clear, to estimate and measure how good any architecture is with regard to any particular value or set of values and costs. Practical, this is what we're talking about here. Most of the conventional enterprise architecture, and I have a reference to Probably should have a, there we go. Um, and there's a reference to the value requirements free downloadable textbook. You'll find that at the back in the references. I go into detail. But most of the enterprise architecture methods, I am not impressed by the degree to which they take this stuff seriously about value and stakeholders. They're in particular, they're not quantified, okay? They're not clear. And that's the foundation for any kind of enterprise architecture, or indeed any kind of architecture at all. Okay, so I say game over when I see no quantification of value. They're just, from my point of view, it's worthless. Should anybody know, but nobody's come up with it yet, about other enterprise architecture methods that do clarify and quantify the values very well that I don't know about, I'd really appreciate you sending me links or the literature or something like that. So they're all talking about it sort of, but they're not doing it visibly. You can't find it, okay? So I'd like you to meet a friend of mine. He's still alive and well, but Professor Emeritus, meaning retired, University of Austin, Texas, Professor of Mechanical Engineering, Billy Cohen, Billy Von Cohen. There's his book. We encountered his ideas when I was working at Boeing. All the Boeing astronautics people were quite thrilled. He was trying to define what is engineering. Okay, and everybody there was an engineer and doing engineering, but the idea that a professor of mechanical engineering was trying to define engineering in general was interesting. It's like, hasn't anybody ever done this before? Didn't they engineer the pyramids and the aqueducts? And but he wrote a paper on it, which got a lot of attention. And I've since gotten to know him more personally, and he's lectured at my Guildfest in London, for example. And he has, since that paper, written a whole book. And if you are intellectually very deep and want to understand engineering very deeply, I highly recommend reading the book, okay? But so here's his, of course, not the whole book and not even the whole paper, but the basic ideas that engineering is making small changes in the sota. Well, what's the sota? Well, it's the state of the art. Okay, in other words, improving things beyond the state of the art. If the state of the art in reliability is there, then engineering is maybe trying to get a little bit better. This is exactly what my entire language method is talking about. And he uses what he calls heuristics. These are just good advice to engineers. I would call them principles. And for example, I have my book, all of my books and papers have lots and lots of principles, including this one, but here is Principles of Software Engineering Management. And there are 140 or so principles in that book. Somebody counted. Anyway, here's one. Always give yourself a chance to retreat if things don't turn out when you take a small change. Okay, now this small change, some of you will know this in Agile as a sprint, or in my method, value delivery step. Okay, we talked about last chapter. But always give yourself a chance to retreat and use feedback to stabilize, meaning make it work better and not go to extremes, the design process. Might like to say the architecture process. Okay. And this is, I said exactly these same things as early as my page 214 to 17 of my software metrics book, 1976. Very clear about the fact we did small changes. We needed to give ourselves a chance to retreat and use the feedback to improve things. So this is what I stated long before he said that. I don't, but this is just good engineering common sense. Now, what is this? Well, this is a way of handling risks, okay? Number one, making small changes is a fantastic way of handling risk. That's maybe why Agile works slightly better than not Agile. And everybody who's analyzed successful and unsuccessful projects makes the point that the small projects succeeded better than the gigantic projects. So small is beautiful from the point of view of managing the risk that things go wrong. Okay. The Norwegian Axon project that I've been talking about here and there, it was talked about last week in Aftenposten again. They had a big scandal in Aftenposten and in the government, but they have reported that they have decided to do it in smaller steps than 8 years and 22 billion kroner, which is a big waterfall project. So but I would like to see them do it in even smaller steps. They're probably thinking of a step of 2 years, and I think they should make steps of a month at a time, for example. Always give yourself a chance to retreat. Do not specify any architecture which you have to buy and write a 10-year contract for, and you lock yourself in, okay? Assume Murphy's Law. If anything can happen, it will. And be prepared to retreat, pull out your sub-architecture that you tried to do on a step that isn't working, pull it out, throw it away, modify it, don't pay for it, find something better, okay? But don't ever, in other words, the architect must be conscious. If I specify this, and if they do it, does it mean they have to sign, for example, a long contract and pay everything in advance for 10 years and lock themselves in? Okay, if so, that architecture is a bad architecture from the point of view of this trying it out, seeing how well it works, and retreating if it doesn't. Feedback means several things. First, it means measuring the primary effect. If you have an architecture for security, it's supposed to improve the level or degree of security defined by some scale of measure. And for example, scale of measure I use as a simple example is probability of detecting a hacker within 5 seconds, okay? And if you want to improve the security level from 80% to 95%, then you need to measure that when you plugged in your architecture that should get you to 95%, that you really got approximately 95%. This is exactly as, for example, Confirm It, the Norwegian company with case studies in the reference to the back, do very well with 25 different parallel qualities at the same time in 4 parallel groups. Very interesting engineering use of our methods there. And now the feedback, if it says, okay, you got what you expected, well, the architecture specification has been a success. Let's hope it continues to be a success as you increment more and more. Something which is good for the moment could turn out to be very bad when you add other architectural elements. So we not only have to measure, do we get to 95% in this increment, but we need to continuously, this is like regression testing, let's call it architecture regression testing, to coin a term, but you need to continuously make sure it's still at about 95% and doesn't suddenly dive down to 10% because of something you added that doesn't mix very well. And then stabilizing the design process. This stabilization of the design process is very much like something I've talked about earlier. I think there's some coming up here in this lecture, the IBM clean room process. Now, again, if you want full detailed information on the IBM clean room process, go to the references at the back of this book and look under IBM clean room, especially Quinnen, the architect. And every single step, he uses the feedback to decide whether the architecture is good or bad. And if it's bad, he does something about it. And in that sense, he stabilizes the design process. That means he tries to get it back on track. Maybe we went from 80 to 90, but we didn't get to 95. So he has to design something better that he hopes will get to 95. And if on a future step he gets to 95, well, we're stabilized the design process. That means the design is working as intended. That means it is delivering the degree of security we want. And by the way, we have to get feedback not only on the primary reason for architecture, we have to get feedback on the side effects. That means all the other stakeholder objectives. We have to make sure they're not getting worse. And if we have estimated with an impact estimation table that some of them, the side effects should get better, then we have to check that they indeed got better. This is like a chess move that controls many things simultaneously. We can't just look at one single thing about a chess move. Okay. Okay. Nice. Thank you, Billy. May he live long and may. By the way, you'll find a video, I hope, in the back there. If not, let me know, where he explains his ideas, and there's a paper on it. These are free downloads. The book, of course, will cost you a little bit, but if you're intellectually very deep and want to know fundamentally what's engineering, I highly recommend his book there. So I told you I have principles for everything. So I have principles for enterprise architecture risk, and I'm going to spend a lot of time going through them. Each of my principles are powerful, deep, eternal, universal, all kinds of wonderful things. You can judge if they're really that good. Maybe you will look back in 10, 20, 30 years, and I still meet a lot of my students from the 80s and 90s, believe it or not. You can tell me whether these principles still help you and have helped you for the past decades. Okay, so I'm hoping these are powerful and useful. Maybe you'll only fully appreciate the principles when you have specifically used them and tried them out and see how they work, and you see that they do work every time you use them. I'm very humble. I don't call these laws of enterprise architecture risk engineering. So principles means they generally work, but sometimes they might not work, but they will generally help you for the most part. And if they don't work, well, you've got a few other principles to help you too. So number one, any uncertainty with your enterprise architecture, so that's what you specify as the architecture, okay? If you have specified some architecture, but you don't know everything about it, know how it will mix with all the other architecture decisions, some made by maybe other people, okay? Like a specialist security architect, if you're the main enterprise architect. If you don't know how everything mixes and everything works, and if you don't know how it works in the culture you're putting it in, like the Norwegian hospital situation, then there's uncertainty, okay? And actually, it's very simple. Everything is uncertain before you do it. And even after you measure that it works, it's still uncertain because it might not be as good tomorrow when you mix other things or when time goes on, right? So let's just assume uncertainty in your architecture is always present, but maybe some architecture is a little bit more certain, meaning you know what will happen, what effect it will have on your values and costs, okay? Some architecture is a little bit more certain than others. Why is any architecture more certain than others? Well, because you've done it before, or many people have done it before. And it always seems to work in the same way, and it hasn't held any surprises for decades, things like that, okay? Uncertain, well, actually it's a new idea, and it's a new product or new technology, and we are being swamped with new technologies all the time at a great rate and being asked to use them. So these have often no track record, or it's like a vaccine somebody just made, but it hasn't been tested yet. And even when it's been tested, there's still uncertainty. Will it work on people over 85 in Norway, that kind of thing. Okay, doesn't matter how well it's worked on like American tests or Indian tests or something like that. So uncertainty is there, and the only question is, what is the degree of uncertainty? You know, close to none, you know, it's a dead certain, well-tried ancient principle, or extremely high. Anything could happen, but we hope it'll work. Okay. We're going to talk, I have devices for estimating the degree of uncertainty. They are built into the impact estimation table, which is, I think, chapter 11 in the book. And it's also in the competitive engineering book too. But we have an uncertainty scale of, for example, 0, no uncertainty, to 1.0, perfect certainty. Okay, that's a very specific tool that I use to deal with us trying to recognize how much uncertainty do we as an architect have when we specify this architecture. Got it? We'll see more of that later, and you can go to the impact estimation table, chapter 11, to get great detail on that. Okay, now this uncertainty poses a threat to the planned objectives. Okay, now knowing that in the video the picture is very small, I'll enlarge these things. Okay, poses a threat to the planned objectives outcome. In other words, you might not get the good result you were hoping to get when you specified the architecture, or maybe you will get the result you expected, but maybe 1 year later than the deadline, or 22 billion kroner more than the budget, or maybe you will get the delivery deadline and you'll get the budget and you'll get the security outcome, but it will destroy a side effect, like the usability will be destroyed. Okay, which means you really have to yank it out and do something that doesn't simultaneously threaten your usability. Find another security design. Okay, so and since the architecture has an obligation professionally to understand, to be able to analyze, to find data on the threats, multiple threats. That is, there's threat to all planned objectives, and there is threat to all resources, whereas the deadline is just an example. Okay, so now this is something I find that enterprise architects, as taught, don't do. They don't systematically go through 10 value objectives and 4 resources and say, this architecture I'm specifying, what is the expected effect and how certain are we? Okay, and that's what we do with an impact estimation table, but that is not what almost all enterprise architects do. Again, if you know of some method of doing that, and if you were, there is one known engineering method that tries to do something like that. It's called quality function deployment. It's taught at the systems engineering universities in Norway. I don't think it's a very good method. It comes from Japanese Toyota lean area, and I've written why it isn't such a good method, but it does try to do that. It does try for each design architecture component to analyze how effective it is, but it doesn't go very deep into the uncertainty part. Okay, so there are methods out there aside from my own, but the method I'm going to suggest as a baseline is my impact estimation table. And if you know of something better, please tell me. And if you don't, just use it. Okay, so principle number 2, called learn fast principle. The best way to deal with risks is to early, frequently, measurably. Now let me define the terms. Early means, certainly this year, maybe this quarter, maybe this month, and maybe next week. Not in 8 years, as it was the projected outline for the Axon project by PwC in Norway. Okay, that's Big Bang Waterfall. So we're definitely agile. We are doing agile engineering, or engineering agile, if you like. And now early, you might say, shouldn't we take the things with the highest risk and do them earliest? Sounds like a good idea, and nothing wrong with it. But one of the problems is that it might be more interesting to do things that will give you a good result for sure early. So you build up credibility, and then at some point you're so good that you can take one of these high risk things, and if it fails, no big deal. You still have lots of credibility. So there are arguments both way, whether you should take big risks early or not take big risks early. And it's a little bit has to do with your culture. Whether it's a culture that just loves to take big bets and big risks, let's call it Silicon Valley culture, or maybe the Norwegian government medical systems, which is maybe would not like to take great risks and would like to get things done early. So you have to say, what is our culture for taking risk? But there is a possibility that high risk architecture is plugged in as an increment early to test it out as sort of a pilot test. Okay, that presumes that you have some way of saying how risky is your architecture. I told you I have a number called credibility, which goes from 0 to 1.0 in 10 steps, and that when you assign the number by looking at how well known it is, who has measured it, what experience we have with it, you get a risk assessment, and then you can say, well, all the 0.9 things which are extremely certain, I'll do them first for the first year, so I'll look really good, and then I'll start plugging in the 0.1, meaning very low credibility, very high risk things. And if things go wrong, people won't be too bothered. They're having so much fun using my highly valuable system as it is. Okay. Now, frequently, well, I love, as I said in the decomposition section earlier, I love to do things in general for even fairly large projects. For example, things I've done at US Department of Defense weekly. Okay. I believe that's possible if you know how, and this book is trying to tell you how, especially the decomposition chapter. But if we have a little country Norwegian health project, which really is going to take 5 years, okay, I could forgive the Norwegian government if they said, look, do some delivery of value every month. I could even live with every quarter of a year. But that means the real health system's going to get better every month or every quarter. And after 1 year, we have 4 value increases. Maybe because we prioritize high value first, we get a lot of value for the time. Okay, so I can live with that. As I said, a more general idea is 2% of the time to deadline, or 2% of the budget would be a nice idea. The idea is it's not, I think the current thinking on the Axon system is Norway is to do it in smaller chunks, but I think the chunks are probably far too big. Like there's a 3-year thing. Guess what? It's going to take 9 years before they're done with it. Okay. So by dividing the 3-year thing into monthly increments and discovering that a monthly increment really takes 3 months, the architect might get in there and do, as I talked about last time, design to cost, right? They might find a better architecture that doesn't take 1 month every time. And so the project won't take 3 years to deliver instead of 1 year. I refer you back to the IBM clean room method with Quinnen as the architect. And measurably deliver a value stream. Okay, so we're not delivering the work we've done. That's when you deliver a user story or an epic, okay, or some code or working code. You are delivering some work you're doing. In fact, you're delivering a design. You may not call it architecture, although epics are probably architecture. And user stories are probably closer to some kind of design. But you know, and what people do is they do the work and deliver the design, and they assume that value will follow. Okay, and my theory is that if you haven't identified the value and you haven't put a number on it, like I want 95% probability of discovering a hacker within 5 seconds, okay, then you can't just deliver some user story about security. You know, I want to do encryption because I want security. You can't do that kind of thing, because you don't really know how much security you got, and you don't really know how much security you wanted or which your stakeholders decided they wanted. You just know that that the encryption maybe probably delivers some value. Okay, but that's not good enough. So measurably means we have quantified the values we want, and we measurably look at the degree to which it has been delivered. Single increments don't have to deliver the 95%. If you're starting at 80%, one weekly increment that goes from 80 to 85% is great. And then another increment that goes from 85 to 90% is great. And then a third increment that goes to 97% is better than great, gets you to 95% more. So you might need, for example, 3 increments to deliver, but you need to measure the degree to which your architecture has delivered. You need to compare it to your expectations, your estimates when you thought about the architecture. And if the actual delivery is far worse than expectations, what you as the architect estimated, then you as the architect have to dive in and do something about it. You know, maybe you by tweaking the specification, you might solve the problem. By swapping the architecture to a totally different architecture, you might solve the problem. You might not know how to solve the problem. There might be no solution, but there might be a smarter architect than you who you could consult with, who might be able to suggest something to do about it. Okay, so okay, so that but measurably deliver means we deliver and we measure and we compare what happened against expectations and progress towards the longer term goal. And we need to learn how fast our architecture actually works. In other words, can we deliver 5% security every month? Okay, or does it in fact take 3 months when we thought it'd take 1 month? And again, it's not enough that the architecture works, it's how fast it works. Okay, speed of implementation is key in Agile. Okay, and one way to get fast is not just to work harder, but work smarter, as IBM used to say. And the smarter work is done by the architect, who finds architecture which can be implemented faster or using less resources. Okay, okay, so learn fast and correct the architecture. Okay, now the EA risk principle, and I'm looking at the clock here, but okay, we've used 36 minutes, and this is a fairly short chapter, so I believe it's a good idea to use time on these principles. Okay, now the how much risk do we have that the stakeholder valued results, the security, for example, will not be delivered or even go negative, have a negative side effect? And the answer is that depends on a lot of things, but it depends on threats, okay? Types of threats, like one threat is you were given wrong information on the architecture by the supplier, okay? Another threat is you don't have a contract with the supplier so that when it goes wrong, you can complain and get mitigation, okay? So the another element is the threat mitigation. Do you have a contract saying that if they don't deliver 90% security, you get your money back or they help you? Okay, that's threat mitigation. That's either, that is in fact, now mitigation is a risk management term, which includes learning to avoid problems learning to detect that problems have happened. That's by the feedback at every step, and learning to thwart or get rid of problems, like forcing the supplier to help you or to give you a different component or something like that. It's also, the risk is a function of the degree of actual attacks, what really happens when you implement. And again, this can change in time, and more and more and more. Okay, so let me summarize this. The total risk is a function of very many things. I have some diagrams coming up which show this. And who is responsible for this? Well, I don't think it's a risk engineer or a risk specialist. I think it is primarily and initially the architect that is responsible for worrying about all of this stuff. That is the risks of their architecture. Okay, and that means they're going to have to learn the technology of mitigation and how do you specify architecture that avoids risks? How do you include in your architecture detection mechanisms like continuous measurement of the security built in? How do you thwart things like having contracts that allow you to get better service from a supplier, things like that. And I think this means that the education or training of the enterprise architect has to be deeper and more profound than anything we've ever had before. By the way, at Ericsson in Sweden, they have a wonderful paradigm, and they say the business of risk is the business of every engineer at all times. In other words, not just the high-level engineers known as architects for the system. So every engineering person, that is everybody specifying designs, is responsible for all these things at their level of responsibility and detail. But the architect themselves is a primary power with a lot of leverage, and they need to learn to do these things and not expect somebody else will do it. It's not going to happen. Okay. In some ideal world, you'd have a risk engineer who would take a look at all the architecture and do all this stuff to it. Maybe, but I think there's a good argument that is the architect themselves that must be trained to think about risk and all these problems of risk. So moving on to number 4, risk mitigation. So mitigation means when the shit hits the fan and something goes wrong, you can either say, oops, let's think about this, give me a few weeks or something. But you could say, don't worry, I, as an architect, have designed into it something that means it's not going to hurt us, whatever it is. It could be that contract with the supplier that gives you extraordinary service from the expert supplier to fix the architecture. That would be a mitigation, but you have to decide how the contract will be written for that component. You don't just say, we're going to do technology X. You say, we're going to do technology X and write the contract so that if it doesn't deliver, we have certain financial and practical rights to help to mitigate the problem that it isn't helping. Okay. So I found that in my career extremely powerful, writing contracts so that the supplier has to take responsibility when their fantastic claims of how wonderful their component is aren't true. Okay, and who's going to do that? You could say, well, shouldn't the corporate lawyer do that in the contract? And I said, not at all. The architect must tell the lawyer exactly what to put in the contract so as to mitigate the fact that it doesn't work. Lawyers have no idea what to do until you tell them about these things. So the architect has to architect the, let's call it the architecture of the contract for each individual supplier, and there can be a lot of them. Okay, I wonder what kind of contracts the Norwegian Health Department has with PwC, who've already paid them, what is it, $20 million kroner, or was it 200? I forget, over 8-year period to and had some mitigation if they didn't actually deliver better results than they delivered. And the answer was nobody did that, obviously. Okay, just it took a government scandal to wake everybody up to what was going on. Okay, principle number 5. The architect has to take a full systems perspective, and that means world politics, like would the Chinese refuse to deliver your component in supply chain because they got angry at you because you charged them, world economy, like what is the rate of exchange for the Norwegian kroner now, world health, think COVID, etc. So, and of course, this is just very consciously talking about outside our system, things that influence our system. That's exactly who the architect is, the one who takes that broader, bigger perspective view and says, if the Chinese fail to deliver, if the Norwegian exchange rate or oil price goes down, if another COVID hits, I've got to do things in my system so the system survives it pretty well. That is my responsibility. When reviewing an architecture, the reviewers have to have a little checklist of these things and said, to what degree has the enterprise architect asked himself, if COVID hits again, right? And the staff can't work on things, or they're all working from home, will the system work? And has the architect designed it so that it will work in spite of COVID and home offices and people being sick? And if not, it's not a good enough system in today's world. COVID has impressed that upon everybody, I'm sure. Okay, but it's all too easy to say, oh, well, the system didn't work because COVID hit. Okay, no. We know about pandemics. They're old, they happen all the time. Your system has to take into consideration COVID will hit, and the people running and operating the system, okay, your service people, for example, on your IT system, are going to be working from home with screaming kids in the background. Okay, and so your system has to work in spite of that. So whole systems thinking. Now, let's see. Yeah, more lists of things to think about. The fact that we have so often in enterprise architecture a very narrow IT focus, that's dangerous, because there are lots of really important things that we're not going to feel responsible for, we're not going to architect, and our systems will fail. There is a high risk that they will fail on one or more of these things that the narrow-minded architects haven't applied. So architects need to be very broad. They need to think of everything that can in fact be a risk and decide to do something about it or to not do something about it, but they should specifically state, I decided I wouldn't worry about pandemics, or I wouldn't worry about 1,000-year floods or something like that. Think of the fun in Texas with the electricity to everything right now. Somebody didn't think that it could snow in Texas very well, okay? So number 6, now the bad things that can happen are pretty unlimited, very much unknown, very difficult to predict when they will happen and the degree will happen. And the consequences are even worse. So you can't, nobody's asking you to deal perfectly with them all. You're going to have to make a list of the major threats, the landslide under the house, the snowstorm in Texas, and you're going to have to do a cost-benefit prioritization of them and tackle the most probable, most dangerous things explicitly, and maybe say that after the system is installed, we have a list of 10 risks we haven't dealt with. We will, during the operation of the system, start dealing with the ones we didn't have time to deal with, the call them 100-year flood levels, and hope we get them done before the 100-year flood happens in 3 years' time. Okay, so in other words, you don't have to deal with everything before a system goes live. You need to prioritize the risks you're going to deal with, but that doesn't mean that you don't actually have, you actually have an unlimited list. And there comes a point where it's so improbable and the damage is so little that you can explicitly state, we decided not to design anything into the system. It wouldn't be cost effective. When the snow hits in Texas, we'll just live with no electricity for a week or so. Okay, but they didn't say that. Now, okay. Let's see what I'm going to do. I'm going to skip that one. If you think about who is responsible for dealing with risks, the answer is, in fact, the board level of an institution or corporation. The highest level in Norway for health systems, it might be the health minister, for example, and there may be different kinds of boards, things like that. They actually have the responsibility. The architect just carries out the responsibility in a reasonable way, and the board may review it, what they've done, or get somebody competent independently to review what they've done. But there's an interesting question. Does your board level know how to independently assess the goodness of how the architecture group has dealt with the risk? I think most boards haven't got a clue. Okay, they don't do it. They don't know how to do it. And the architect does know how to do it. So there's like, what we're doing is just living with all those risks of things happening because nobody has developed this idea well enough. Okay. Let's see. The architect has lots of choices of how to deal with risk, but as usual, as it says in the old paradigm, a stitch in time saves 9. That's Benjamin Franklin about 1776 in Poor Richard's Almanac. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So dealing with problems upstream and preventing them is generally the most cost-effective architecture. And a lot of people don't do that. They only know about downstream things that detect problems. They don't know about upstream things that prevent problems. Okay, so their knowledge of the architectural options is poor. One could, just for fun, say, what about a one-day course that just teaches upstream and prevention to architects? Okay, I'll give you a whole lot of stuff to teach about it. You can start with, for example, IBM's defect prevention process as a general method for doing that on a large scale in a large organization. Look under IBM defect prevention process in my references. And there, the 10th principle is that risk is intimately integrated with the problem of security of the system. The more risk you're letting loose, the more security problems you're going to have. Okay, here is a nice little diagram of upstream and downstream. And here is the idea that there are some threats which can lead to the threats materializing. In other words, the system is attacked, and then the architect has actually worked in reducing the threats. Okay, for example, by contract, by giving information, by having people looking for the threats. Okay, the attacks, they can be detected before they really damage the system early. So early detection of attacks can be built in. And then the attacks have happened and they've gotten through. It could be as simple as bugs in software or ransomware on your database. And then there's built-in mitigation, which could be, that ha ha ha, you can't threaten me with destroying my files because I have really good offline copies of the files. Okay, remember a lot of health systems and government systems got threatened, and and even commercial systems like Hydro, and they didn't have good enough backup, and so the architects had failed in their duty. Okay, and then finally there is damage. Because we couldn't deal with it at this level. And but we can, I think I have another diagram here later that says when the damage is done, you can still have things like insurance that compensates for the damage done. And the architect can decide that part of the system is we must have insurance against ransomware or insurance against COVID or something like that. And that's part of the architecture. Okay. So here, now we're running out of time, so I'll just sketch the rest of it. But here's the kind of thing we were looking at earlier in the course. So here is a whole set of stakeholders. And just for fun, I've grouped them in such a way that I can say these stakeholders are where you're going to analyze threats. These stakeholders are where damage is going to happen, and you need to analyze potential damage, the degree of it. We're going to do at this level. And these stakeholders are relevant to the problem of mitigation. So there's a very interesting concept that deep stakeholder analysis, and here's a good starter list, gives the architect a set of very specific practical targets to go through one by one, and said, what kind of threats can come from these or emanate from these or something like that. By the way, in reviewing the architecture, this list can also give the reviewers a tool for reviewing how well the architect did in coping with these different things. Okay. So in the software engineering architecture language, which is just a synonym for my planning language, everything I've taught up to now, everything in the book and everything coming in the book are tools to help you deal with risk. That means there are literally hundreds of specific tools to help the architect deal with risks. Okay. In very simple terms, that page contains 10 tools called principles, which this page contains another 10 tools called stakeholders of certain types. Okay, so the books are quite dense, but they're dense with lists of tools you can use to do the job in a practical way. Okay. Okay. Here's a very rich man, still alive, interestingly enough, 1930, Warren Buffett. Bill Gates, he gave all his money to Bill Gates and said, when I'm dead, you invest it wisely. You're another billionaire, so I trust you. Okay. Anyway, lovely quote. Risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. Love it. And I think we have too many enterprise architects who do not know what they're doing. Now, whose fault is that? Well, partly it's their fault if they're not reading this book, listening to the lecture and taking action on it. But partly it's their organization's fault that hasn't trained them in these methods and made them responsible. So partly it's society's fault that hasn't given a university training that's given these methods. Okay. And yeah, so there's a whole chain of responsibility for why we're not very good at knowing what we're doing as enterprise architect. But we're trying to catch up with the technology, and these lectures and this book and these methods are an attempt to catch up. So we're approaching the And here I've mentioned IBM clean room method. So here's our hero, Harlan Mills, who's the Leonardo da Vinci, and his architect, Robert Quinan, was the architect who did this, and basically few late or overrun deliveries in that decade and none in all in the past 4 years. So this is perfect large-scale, high-tech project management in practice. And it is using exactly the methods I'm teaching you. They quantify all their values. They divide up into 2% steps. Their architect looks at the feedback from every incremental step and adjusts the architecture so that things work. And this is detailed in the references that you'll find at the back there. So that's an example of doing this architecture thing in practice, and that's the bottom line result. Instead of having all projects taking 3 times more than it should in money and time, we hit the deadline, we hit the budget, and we hit the high quality values like military values, 99.998% availability, high quality and complex systems that nobody's ever done before to get to the moon and back and that kind of thing. So if there's any doubt it can be done and has been done, take a look at these references. There's a very direct link to my slides on the subject and other things. Okay, that brings us to 1 hour. Here's an overview of what's going to happen next Tuesday. We're going to look at the idea of aligning the architecture to the enterprise objectives and visions. In other words, what most people would think of this as what top management wants, but I hope that top management wants to satisfy all critical stakeholders, not just top management themselves and nobody else. Okay, and that would include people who believe that COVID tracing systems should not steal data and misuse it without really people understanding what's happening, as in smittestopp. Okay, that top management wasn't really very interested in that, but there were people in Norway who said, we are interested and we'll fight the battle and we'll bring it up to the government, and they won. Okay, so alignment should mean alignment with all critical stakeholders. Okay, and hopefully your top management wants to align with all critical stakeholders. Anyway, that's what we're going to do on Tuesday, and chapter 9 we'll do on Thursday. At that point, I will open for questions, and we decided you can certainly focus on questions about risk and things I've been saying, but if anybody wants to bring up questions about anything I've been talking about earlier, you're very welcome to do it. So I'll bring up my everybody listening, and I'm listening for questions.
Yeah, I thought I'd give somebody else a chance to ask something, but okay, maybe I can start off then. Have you heard about Barry O'Reilly's anti-fragile framework for handling risk?
The anti-fragile, yes.
Yeah, the ideas for anti-fragile is originally from I think it's Nicholas Taleb. He wrote the book Anti-Fragile.
That's right.
Yeah, but
so I have scanned this stuff. I don't have any intimate practice or deep knowledge of it, so but it sounds good.
Yeah, but I think Barry's method is quite fun, because it's what it is. He starts off with you start off by thinking what can go wrong, yeah. And his start part is the Godzilla comes out of the sea and attacks your data center. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you start up with that and you say, okay, how can I mitigate it? A bit like what your mitigation thing is, yeah. So, and then you think of something else, yeah, and they say, okay, how can I mitigate it? And gradually you get towards more realistic scenarios, yeah. And
well, this sounds like what I've been talking about.
yeah. And then after a while, you get to a point where you think of something and say, "Ah, yeah, but the mitigation thing that we did 10 steps ago, that covers that one." Yeah. So that after, when you get to like 20 or 30 or maybe 50, after a while, you get to the point where you've handled it, you've thought about it. Or the mitigation you did to do that thing also covers the other one.
Yeah. One mitigation can cover many risks.
Yeah.
Is another thing.
So
by the way, could you do me a favor and send me a link so I can refresh my memory and rethink it, and then I'll comment.
yeah.
But I think they're talking about a high-level ideal. Don't have too many risks that hit you. And I'm talking about very pragmatic steps like these stakeholders and these risks, these categories of stakeholders, and values quantified. I'm going into much more engineering detail about this high-level idea. Don't build fragile systems.
Yeah.
But I'd like to, if you help me, I'd like to take another look at it and think about it and maybe plug it in somewhere.
Yeah, and then the Taleb's system, he looks at sort of natural things like the human body. You put it under stress, and because you put it like training, and because you put it under stress, it becomes stronger. Yeah. So then your IT system should work in the same way. That when they're attacked, say you get an attack, and then you do something to it so it'll be stronger next time it gets attacked.
Yeah. Well, this is one version of that. Then is a learning mechanism that when attacked, you don't just mitigate that attack, but you mitigate future attacks of the same nature. But and the human body is probably a very good example of a well-architected system. Thank you, God. Any other questions?
I have one question.
This way.
Yeah, here in Norway, the health sector, especially the regional health trust, they use a recommendation from the Norwegian Data Protection Authority to divide the information into several zones.
Yes.
And depending on the risk of the information, the sensitivity of the information. But most of the time,
let me stop you. This is an example of a legal authority dictating required architecture. That's all.
Right.
And so you have to do that and live within that frame. It's a design constraint, is what I call it, and it comes from a stakeholder called the Norwegian Data Protection Authority. Yeah, please continue.
Yeah, and most of the time, it's difficult, to manipulate and use these data, especially, from the secured zone, to researches and use it into other purpose than to just go there and read the information. So, what's your idea, or I mean, if you have, some other ideas, how to or tips, how to implement this kind of thing.
Now, if I understand your question, somebody has dictated an architecture that makes some data very secure, but at the same time difficult to access and share and manipulate or do something with it.
Yeah, they can share the information by using the tunnel, the Norwegian health platform, which is developed by the NHN, Norwegian Health Net. But most of the time researchers, the academic institutions, something like they want to access to that information and make some researches, especially in the health sector. But it's very difficult to get out this data. And
okay, now in general, any security tactic will reduce the, let's call it, usability of the system. For example, usability for researchers. In general, this will always happen. However, absolutely perfect security means nobody could ever get a hold of it for any purpose, which is ridiculous. So the moment you start so you have to balance. The security has to be loose enough that you can use it for good purposes, and tight enough it cannot be easily used for bad purposes. Okay, now for what this means for me is, in addition to a security set of values or objectives, quantified. Okay. By the way, you weren't given a quantified objective by the Data Protection Authority. You were given a design constraint. Okay. Notice that. So as some, in other words, they're doing part of the architectural work for you, whether you like it or not. And they have the power to do it. Okay. So, but it does design constraints like that pose problems. So it means that you have to have some values called, let's have one that you were explicitly referring to: ease of access for academic research for health. Okay, and you are a health researcher yourself, I happen to know. Okay, and and this is desirable also, because if we don't research on the health, we don't get better health so easily, right? So so what we have to do is we have to define how the ease of access to the data for health research, okay, and set a level, okay. And ideally, we should be able to set a level which is high enough for most purposes, but not so high that it violates the data protection requirements. Okay? So the architect is going to be balancing the ease of access, or ease of access for health researchers on the one hand, as one value from one stakeholder called the academics. Okay? And then there's this other stakeholder called the Data Protection Authority with its desire for security. They're going to have to balance the critical stakeholder requirements. Okay, and they do this by plugging in architecture that moves us in the direction of better and better access for research without threatening the health. In practice, you can't dump the data protection design that they gave you about compartmentalizing the data, you know, unless you maybe got an exception for them or negotiated with them, you know, said, do you mind if we modify it a little bit, we can get better health research. That's always a possibility. Ideally, the Data Protection Authority would not give you a design. That's a very bad practice. They should give you the level of security they wanted. They should quantify the value of how secure it's going to be. And then you might plug in that design they suggested, but you might plug in a different design which satisfied their security needs, their data protection needs, which made it much easier for the academics to access the data. Okay? So in other words, people dictating architectures to you is generally a bad idea, but some people don't know it's a bad idea. Okay, maybe if Björn at the Data Protection Authority would talk to me, I would explain to him why it's a bad idea and how he could quantify his data protection needs. And we're such a small country that if somebody here knows Björn, I've seen him at meetings, he's the chief of the Data Protection Authority, and says, Tom says you have a stupid way of doing it, and he's got a smarter way, and he'll tell you for free. And that would make it easier for us to protect on the one hand, but not inhibit other important objectives for society, like the research on health. Okay. Good question. I hope the answer interests some people. And I'll always put my mouth where my mouth is. I will help the Data Protection Authority give more intelligent directions for how to give data protection. But in general, they should not demand specific architectures. Okay, they should demand specific levels of protection, and then it's up to you to find an architecture that gives that and gives other things. The problem with people like data protection who can set laws is they have a lot of power to just set a law, so they just go ahead and do it, and they're well-meaning, they're not evil, okay, they're doing the best they can, but sometimes they, without realizing it, inhibit other good purposes. But the academics don't have as much power as they do. They have legal power to demand a bad architecture. And that's really a shame, but they don't know that that's a bad idea. I will tell them when asked. You and I can go, we can have a little Zoom meeting, Tesfaye, you and I, and with them, and explain to anybody who'd like to listen.
Yeah, they call it, a recommendation, but, they will come after if you didn't implement it.
Oh, yeah. And they will shut down your system and fine you and put you in the newspapers and all kinds of offers. So they have, in a sense, been given too much power. Okay, it's not balanced. You could mitigate their power a little bit by saying that nobody has to do an architecture they suggest if they can deliver at least as much data protection or better. That should be the rule. So they can suggest a default architecture, but they should not be allowed to demand an architecture that hurts other purposes. I mean, they're dealing with the whole of society here, the whole of the nation. Okay, and so it's just ignorant lawmaking, but you see that all over the place. Look at my book, Sustainability Planning, about United Nations Sustainability Goals, which the Norwegian government is trying to follow. And I analyze it deeply, and it's filled with direct suggestions from United Nations on strategies and architectures, and they have unclear goals all over the place. Okay? That really horrifies me. That's just not little Norway screwing up. That's the whole world of hungry, uneducated people we're screwing it up for. Again, you should find the book Sustainability Planning, free download in the back of this book. If not, I'll send it on request. Okay, but so this is a universal problem that Einstein pointed out, that Einstein said, people have a problem with ends and means. In other words, with requirements in architecture, the ends, and requirements and objectives, I meant to say. Those are the ends, right? And means. And what they do is they plug in the means, the architecture, instead of what they really want, which is to end hunger. Okay, so they start talking about that we must have refrigerated containers to get the food to Africa before it rots. Okay, rather than saying what is the probability we'll get usable food at a certain price to Africa, with whatever architecture happens to be good, including maybe the refrigerated containers, but maybe something else, like they grow it locally, which is much smarter than containers fish from Norway to Africa. Okay, so in other words, it's an old problem. It is pervasive in everything. Everybody is just as silly. My job is to try to point it out and to try to give help to people, say, okay, I got it. Our government authorities should not be dictating architecture. They should be suggesting levels of performance and quality for, health or security or privacy, whatever their job is. Okay, and our architects should be finding architecture to satisfy those legally required levels, right? And they should be able to prove that they have reached the legally required degrees of privacy or security or whatever it is. And then we should be free to use any architecture. See, one of the problems is the people at the Data Protection Authority, they don't know which technology is coming next year, which might be 10 times cheaper and 10 times better, okay? And our projects in Little Norway have 8-year time spans, okay? You cannot allow them to dictate finite technology, which is probably obsolete by the time they even put it into a law or things like that, okay? So this is the tactic for rapid technological change. You say how good it's going to be, you quantify the values, right? You do not dictate architecture, which is probably out of date or going to be. That's just silly, and it's not a good way of managing our high technological change that we have. It's not good for health. Sorry, I got on my high horse here, but I had time, and I see Tommy smiling a lot, and that's good. So he's getting it.
I recognize the problem. we're delivering within health a journal system, and of course like Heuristics or stuff like that, always with the architecture demands, not with the measurable requirements.
Right. By the way, I have a suggestion. In some cases, but not all of them, when your stakeholder demands a certain architecture, they don't know what they're doing. They think they're doing a good idea. Okay. So what I found in practice for decades, I can go to them and say, you are demanding this architecture. And then I start on the Japanese 5 whys. Why are you demanding that architecture? And hopefully they'll give you an answer like it would give better data protection. Okay, how much data protection do you want? And this, you might have to teach them how to express the idea, but if they're in the business, they should know. The data protection authority should know how to quantify degrees of data protection, or they are incompetent and dangerous. Okay, I will teach them for free when they're ready to learn. Okay, but let's say this one, well, we expect this much data protection. Okay, 95% catching a hacker or something like that. I say, fine, if you don't impose that architecture on me, I will give you 99% guaranteed. So what do you want? You want your architecture with 95, or you want to let me do the architecture, but you get 99? What do you want? Now, if they say, I want my architecture, no matter how bad it is, they are not doing their job properly. Okay? You should even threaten to make them look silly. They turned down our offer to give better data protection, and they are the data protection authority. You should get the notes in writing that Björn said, do my stupid architecture. I don't care if you have a better idea. But he should be put in Dagbladet or Verdensgang as the scoundrel for demanding architecture that gives lower data protection. Okay? But normally I found you can reason with the people. They say, that sounds interesting. I can get more of what I want if I let you figure out the architecture. You say, yeah, there's some fantastic technology coming downstream that we can plug into our health system quite easily. And you would have never heard of it. It's almost a medical international secret, but we know about it. Okay. And this will just be much better for COVID or something like that. Okay. So but we will be responsible for delivering 99% data protection. We'll put that in writing. We will prove we've done it. And if we haven't, we'll go back to your architecture. How's that for a deal? We'll put that in writing. They should say yes to such a good deal. Okay. But you, as the architect, realizing you have a better architecture, need to take the initiative to talk to people who are trying to force you to use bad old-fashioned architectures and try to make a deal with them. Okay. And if you're smart enough, you should be able to make that deal. And you don't give up easily. But you have to give them the mafia offer, your money or your life. My architecture at 99 or your architecture at 95 with publicity about what you decided. That's a mafia offer. They have to choose. If they know what's good for them, the better result for society.
Yeah, but I as a response to that, I would say I'm rather afraid that they neither have the trust nor the competency to actually make a wise decision on that one. And also, you will make kind of an enemy of the middleman project manager. That's actually
okay. So you are right. All of this can happen. They may be incompetent. They may be afraid. Now, sometimes if they're the trick is you have to go higher in the organizational hierarchy, like to the health minister kind of thing. Okay, that's one tactic. Go higher. And that doesn't always work either, but it's one known tactic. Okay, the fact that they're incompetent, you could say, look, we will hold a free one-day seminar on this new technology because it's data protection technology and you would probably like to know about it, and we will make sure you're informed for free. What about next Tuesday? We'll sit, we will inform you, and maybe you will realize you would rather we use that architecture. And you had a case that enable you to say, that should be our default architecture. And you say, no, no, no. You don't talk about default architecture, you talk about the level. And you need to educate them slowly that they should talk about the result for society. They should not be amateur architects, because that's what they are, amateur architects without responsibility, without the overview of what's going on. It should not be permitted. But again, Einstein observed 1950s, before he died, people get mixed up with ends and means, and it's a big problem. And maybe you have to be as smart as Einstein to realize this is a problem. And maybe all the government ministers aren't that smart. I have not good experience with the government ministers in Norway yet.
No, I'm afraid there needs to be a culture change.
You're right.
And I believe that actually it has to start with us as the developers. And I don't think
Hooray!
as architects, but I don't
We've
think
seen the problem, and the problem is us.
Yeah.
Excellent. Start where you are. Don't blame other people. Do what you can, at least be seen to do it. And it may take time, but that's how change happens. You know, I love it when my friends Johannes and Simon decided to fight for privacy in the Smittestopp publicly. Okay, and they got short-term action, you know, within the year. So individuals like us who care to learn more, who realize what the problem is, you should at least say that even if I fall on my sword and I fail, history will show I tried. And other people picked up the sword and we finally won. Okay, I mean, I'm an idealist, you may have noticed. Okay, I hope some of you are idealists and you'll fight for what is right and ethical and good for society. Okay, instant change isn't possible, but sometimes within the COVID period, we get a better Smittestopp because some guys like us who we know fought. Great. I will help any idealist who wants to fight the good fight. I very specifically helped some of those people I named in the background, in secret, about this. Okay.
Even, you know, by the time of they developed Smittestopp 1, they were just depending on the situation because, you know, at the first time, you know, they were just afraid of, you know, about the number of contamination, how bad it is, right? So the data protection authority, they just gave them, you know, the green light, and that it takes time, you know, to stop the project. And by that time, you know, the Norwegian authority used 30 million kroner to develop.
That all? I thought Simula did it for free. Anyway, yeah.
And, you know, by the summer comes, and, you know, the number of contaminations, the infections goes down, and, you know, they have got better knowledge, and so this is the time to stop it, right? So it's, it seems, you know, they were just, you know, fluctuating with the situation, you know, and, you know, there was so much unawareness, you know, about
panic and chaos.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Anyway, maybe we can learn from that. By the way, I cited the lesson before. They failed to do stakeholder analysis and look at the European laws for GDPR as a stakeholder and decide, do we have to respect this even if we don't like it or not? The answer was they did have to, but they didn't even look. They just said, forget it. They were told that there was a danger there, and they said, forget it, we're in a hurry. We have a deadline. COVID is more important than the law.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
The law society, you know, they were just shouting, especially, you know, one lawyer, I forget his name all the time, but he just mentioned, you know, the maybe, you know, the probability of having a problem with what you call it, you know, objective sliding, formals gliding. Maybe, you know, they use, you know, the Corona law right now to just, you know, collect, you know, these data and everything. But, you know, later on, they might use, you know, another law to use that data.
Yeah. Very dangerous stuff, but that's why there are some GDPR laws. Okay. By the way, we're running down. This is the book I just finished. It's a hellishly thick, fat book. Took me a long time. I mean, we're 519 pages. But you know what it's about? GDPR, privacy. The Amazon and Google stealing all your data and getting filthy rich and not even, and consciously playing games with the government and lying and changing the technology so fast the government can't keep up. Okay, there is Norwegian language version of this, by the way. Okay, I warn you, you have to be very idealistic and dedicated like me to actually read the whole bloody book. Okay, but I'll tell you what it says. These surveillance capitalism organizations like Google and Facebook are actually evil, very well documented in the book. Okay, they are misusing the whole of society for their own narrow purposes, and the government is not very good at dealing with them, to put it mildly. Okay, so here we have technology, and they're using the fact that technology moves so much faster than legal authorities, like passing a GDPR law. You know, by the time the laws are passed, it's too late and they've moved on. That's just it's a fascinating lesson in, so what are we going to do about it? And I'll give you a simple answer. We must pass laws that can deal with future technology, no matter how radically different it is. You say, is that possible? And I said, yes, all you have to do is look at the Bill of Rights in the United States Constitution, and you'll find examples of things that can affect today's technology, but were written hundreds of years ago. Okay, but we have to be really smart to write a general law that will protect at the high level, no matter what the technology is. The stupid law attacks the technology. You're not allowed to do that with your iPhone. That's a stupid law. Okay, but that we're going in the direction of doing those kinds of things. Okay, it was 5:30, and that's when we end. Anybody who wants to ask a question, didn't get it, the rule is you can write to tom@gilb.com, my email, anytime. Ask me a question, love to talk with you, or even arrange a little meeting over the phone. I'm happy to take those if it helps anybody. And see you next Tuesday and next Thursday for the next 2 chapters of the book. Shiraz, you can close down.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was interesting there. It's because we got the, what do you call it? In Norwegian, called the Heuristics. Yes, we've got the
hardcore.
the hardcore. So we've got the same group going. It's quite good. It gets some better discussions as well. So that's good.
I've learned one thing in my 60 years, and that is, if I can convince one good person like Tesfaye, he can change his entire organization and sometimes the entire country. And I have examples of doing exactly that. So I don't care how many people here, I do care how good they are at picking up the ideas and spreading them in time, the rest of their career. That's all that counts.
That's good.
So I hope we have the hardcore here.
So next Tuesday's meeting is already published, and I'll publish the Thursday meeting as well, and I'll post the link to the recording as well.
Okay, thank you and OSWA so much for taking the trouble to make this happen.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.